Claire Donovan stood in the cramped living room of her tiny apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. The faded wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the air smelled faintly of mildew. She was only 22, but life had already weighed her down with burdens most people never faced. Her mother, Ellen Donovan, lay in a hospital bed across town, her heart failing more each day. The doctors had been blunt. Without a surgery costing $200,000, Ellen would not survive the month. Claire clutched her phone, scrolling through job listings that offered nowhere near enough to save her mother. She felt trapped, suffocating under the pressure of poverty. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of a cheap fan. Claire's hazel eyes, usually bright with determination, were red from sleepless nights. She wore a threadbare sweater, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. Her hands trembled as she opened a browser tab she had avoided for days. It was an ad she had stumbled across on a shady website. A wealthy man needed someone to marry him, no strings attached, just a signature on paper. The reward was a lump sum, enough to cover Ellen's surgery. Claire hesitated, her stomach twisting at the thought. She had always prided herself on her independence, but now pride seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. That afternoon, Claire took a bus downtown, her heart pounding as she stepped into a dingy coffee shop. The place smelled of burnt espresso and grease. She spotted him immediately, a tall man in a tailored coat sitting at a corner table. His name was Daniel Reynolds, though she would soon call him Dan. He had sharp features, dark hair, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. He looked out of place in the grimy setting, like a polished diamond in a pile of coal. Claire approached, her voice shaky as she introduced herself. Dan barely glanced up from his coffee. He explained the deal in a clipped tone. His mother, Dorothy, was dying and refused surgery unless he proved he was married. He needed a wife on paper, nothing more. In return, he would pay Claire $200,000. Claire swallowed hard, her mind racing. She asked how long they would need to stay married. Dan said 1 year, then they would divorce quietly. No contact, no complications. She stared at the table, tracing a scratch in the wood with her finger. This was not how she imagined her life, selling her name to a stranger. But Ellen's face flashed in her mind, pale and fragile, hooked to machines. Claire nodded, her voice barely a whisper as she agreed. Dan slid a contract across the table. She signed it without reading the fine print, her hand shaking. He handed her a check for the full amount, not even blinking as he did. Within 10 minutes, they walked to the city hall 2 blocks away. A bored clerk stamped their marriage license, and just like that, Claire Donovan became Claire Reynolds. Back at the apartment, Claire sat alone, the check clutched in her hands. She felt a strange mix of relief and shame. The money would save Ellen, but at what cost? She thought of Dan, his cold demeanor, his expensive coat. He had not even asked her last name before the deal was done. She wondered who he really was, this man who could throw around hundreds of thousands like it was pocket change. Claire shoved the check into a drawer and grabbed her coat. She needed to get to the hospital, to see her mother, to remind herself why she had done this. The hospital was a maze of white walls and antiseptic smells. Claire found Ellen's room and slipped inside. Her mother looked small under the thin blanket, her breathing shallow. Tubes ran from her arms to machines that beeped steadily. Claire sank into a chair beside the bed, tears spilling down her cheeks. She took Ellen's hand, feeling the frail bones beneath the skin. Ellen stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She smiled weakly and asked why Claire was crying. Claire forced a smile, saying it was nothing, just tired from work. She could not bring herself to tell the truth, that she had just married a stranger to pay for this bed, these machines, this chance at life. Ellen squeezed Claire's hand, her voice raspy as she told her daughter to rest. Claire nodded, but rest was the last thing on her mind. She thought of the marriage license tucked in her bag, a piece of paper that tied her to a man she did not know. Dan had said it was simple, just business. But as she sat there, watching her mother drift back to sleep, Claire felt a knot in her chest. She had crossed a line she could not uncross. The money was real, the marriage was legal, and now her life was tangled with a stranger's in ways she could not predict. Claire stayed until a nurse ushered her out. She walked home through the cold Chicago night, the city lights blurring through her tears. The check in her drawer was her lifeline, but it came with a weight she could not shake. She wondered if Dan felt anything at all, or if he saw her as just another transaction. Back in her apartment, she stood by the window, staring at the dark skyline. She whispered to herself that this was for Ellen, that she had no choice, but deep down, she feared what this decision would cost her, not just today, but in the year to come. Claire Donovan woke to the sound of her phone buzzing on the chipped nightstand. The morning light filtered through the cracked blinds of her Chicago apartment, casting thin shadows across the room. It had been 2 weeks since she signed that marriage contract with Daniel Reynolds, or Dan, as she now thought of him. The check for $200,000 had cleared, and Ellen's surgery was scheduled for tomorrow. Claire felt a flicker of hope for the first time in months, but it came with a restlessness she could not shake. She wanted more than just survival. She wanted a chance to build something for herself. At the hospital, Claire sat by Ellen's bedside, watching her mother sleep. The machines beeped steadily, a reminder of the lifeline that money had bought. Ellen looked better already, her cheeks less pale. A nurse stopped by and said the surgery would go ahead as planned. Claire smiled, squeezing her mother's hand. When Ellen woke, she asked about the money, her voice weak but curious. Claire lied smoothly, saying she had landed a freelance gig that paid well. Ellen nodded, too tired to press further. Claire hated lying, but the truth felt too heavy to share. Back home, Claire opened her laptop and scrolled through job listings. She had dropped out of community college after 1 semester, unable to afford it. Her resume was thin, just a string of minimum wage jobs at diners and gas stations. But then she saw it. An opening for a management trainee at Reynolds Tech, a huge tech firm downtown. The ad asked for a degree, which she lacked, but Claire felt a strange pull. She remembered Dan's name from the contract, though she had no idea he ran the company. On a whim, she typed up an application, pouring her heart into a cover letter about her grit and determination. She hit send and crossed her fingers. Days later, Claire got a call from a woman named Dorothy Reynolds. Her voice was warm but firm, like a grandmother who took no nonsense. Dorothy said she had seen Claire's application and wanted to meet. Claire was stunned. She took the bus to Reynolds Tech's gleaming headquarters, a tower of glass and steel that dwarfed the city around it. Inside, the lobby buzzed with sharply dressed employees. Claire felt out of place in her faded jeans and sneakers, but she straightened her shoulders and walked to the reception desk. A young man led her to an office on the 30th floor, where Dorothy waited. Dorothy was a small woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She wore a navy blazer and a string of pearls, exuding quiet authority. She gestured for Claire to sit and got straight to the point. She liked Claire's application, degree or not. She said Reynolds Tech needed people with real-world experience, not just book smarts. Claire blinked, unsure if this was a trick. Dorothy smiled and added that she had a soft spot for underdogs. Before Claire could process it, Dorothy offered her the trainee position, starting next week. Claire stammered, a thank you, her mind spinning as she left the office. She had no idea Dorothy was Dan's grandmother, pulling strings behind the scenes. Claire's first day at Reynolds Tech was a whirlwind. She arrived early, clutching a cheap notebook and a pen. The trainee program paired her with a team of polished graduates, all with degrees from big-name schools. Claire felt their stares, their whispered judgments about her lack of credentials. Her supervisor, Rachel Bennett, was a tall woman with a tight smile and cold eyes. Rachel assigned Claire a stack of data entry tasks, her tone dripping with condescension. Another coworker, Jake Sullivan, smirked as he passed by, muttering something about charity cases. Claire gritted her teeth and got to work, determined to prove them wrong. The days turned into weeks, and Claire threw herself into the job. She stayed late, poring over spreadsheets and learning the company's systems. Her hands flew across the keyboard, her focus unbreakable. She started noticing patterns in the data, small inefficiencies no one else caught. One evening, She typed up a report with suggestions and left it on Rachel's desk. The next morning, Rachel called her over, her face a mask of irritation. She said Claire's ideas were solid and had been passed up to the boss. Claire felt a rush of pride, but Rachel quickly added that she should not get cocky. That boss was Dan Reynolds, though Claire still did not connect him to the man from the coffee shop. She saw him sometimes, striding through the office in a crisp suit, his presence commanding. He rarely spoke to the trainees, his attention fixed on bigger things. Claire admired him from afar, drawn to his quiet intensity. She had no clue he was her legal husband, the one who had handed her that life-changing check. Dan, for his part, barely noticed the new trainee with the dark hair and determined eyes. His days were a blur of meetings and deals, his mind far from that quick marriage he had arranged. Trouble started brewing soon enough. Rachel and Jake grew jealous of Claire's knack for standing out. One afternoon, Claire found a company pen missing from her desk. The next day, Jake waved it in her face, claiming she had stolen it. Rachel backed him up, her voice loud enough for the whole team to hear. Claire's cheeks burned as she denied it, but the accusation stuck. She overheard whispers in the break room, words like thief and dropout cutting deep. She wanted to quit, to run back to her old life, but she thought of Ellen recovering at home. She had to keep going. Claire fought back the only way she knew how, with hard work. She doubled down, volunteering for extra tasks and staying late to finish them. She taught herself the company's software, her fingers aching from hours of typing. One night, as she packed up, Dorothy appeared at her desk. The older woman had been watching, she said, and liked what she saw. She told Claire to keep her head up, that she had potential. Claire nodded, grateful for the encouragement. Dorothy's words lit a fire in her, a resolve to prove she belonged. By the end of her first month, Claire had earned a small victory. Rachel grudgingly admitted one of Claire's suggestions had saved the team hours of work. Jake stayed silent, his smirk gone. Claire felt a spark of triumph, but she knew the road ahead was long. She walked home that night, the Chicago wind biting at her face. She thought of Dan, the mysterious CEO she admired, and wondered what he would think if he knew her story. She had no idea how close their lives already were, tied together by a piece of paper neither of them fully remembered. Claire Donovan adjusted her blouse as she stepped into the sleek conference room at Reynolds Tech. 3 months into her trainee role, she had settled into a rhythm, her confidence growing with each task she tackled. The office buzzed with energy, phones ringing and keyboards clacking. She liked the chaos, the sense that she was part of something big. Today was different, though. A company cocktail party loomed that evening, and Claire felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She had heard whispers about Daniel Reynolds, the CEO, attending. She admired him from a distance, his quiet strength pulling her in like a magnet. At her desk, Claire sorted through emails, her focus sharp. Rachel Bennett dropped a stack of files in front of her. Her voice clipped as she ordered Claire to finish them by noon. Claire nodded, used to Rachel's coldness by now. Jake Sullivan lingered nearby, his smirk ever present. He muttered something about her being the office pet, but Claire ignored him. She had learned to tune out the noise to let her work speak for itself. By mid-afternoon, she had caught up and even fixed a typo in a report Rachel had missed. She felt a small thrill of pride, but kept it to herself. The cocktail party was held in a swanky rooftop lounge downtown, the Chicago skyline glittering below. Claire arrived in a simple black dress she had borrowed from a thrift store. She felt out of place among the suits and sequins, but she squared her shoulders and grabbed a glass of water. Dan appeared halfway through the night, his presence shifting the room's energy. He wore a dark suit, his blue eyes scanning the crowd. Claire watched him chat with executives, his voice low and steady. When their eyes met briefly, she felt a jolt, though she brushed it off as nerves. Later, Dan approached her table, a rare occurrence. He asked how she was settling in, his tone casual but genuine. Claire stammered a reply, saying she liked the challenge. He nodded, then pulled a folded shawl from his jacket. He said the rooftop got chilly and handed it to her. Claire took it, her fingers brushing his for a split second. She thanked him, her cheeks warm, and he walked away. The gesture stuck with her, small but thoughtful. That weekend she decided to repay him. She spent hours in her tiny kitchen, frying chicken with a butter glaze, a recipe her mom swore by. On Monday, she left a Tupperware container on his desk with a note that read, "Thanks for the shawl." Trouble brewed at work soon after. Rachel called Claire to her office, her face twisted with anger. She held up a project proposal Claire had submitted, claiming it was stolen from her own work. Jake backed her up, saying he saw Claire snooping around Rachel's desk. Claire's stomach dropped. She explained she had built the proposal from scratch, pulling data from public files. Rachel scoffed, but Claire pulled out her laptop and showed time-stamped drafts she had emailed to Dan each night. Rachel's expression soured, but she had no comeback. Dan reviewed the evidence later and praised Claire's diligence, leaving Rachel fuming. The real test came a week later. Dan needed a team to seal a $100 million deal with a tough client, a tech supplier from Texas. The meeting was set at a downtown steakhouse, all polished wood and dim lighting. Claire volunteered, eager to prove herself. The client, a burly man named Hank, liked to negotiate over drinks. Dan warned the team he could not drink due to an allergy, so Claire stepped up. When Hank poured a round of bourbon, Claire grabbed Dan's glass and downed it in one go. The room went quiet. Then Hank laughed, impressed. 3 glasses later, the deal was signed. But Claire's head spun. Dan noticed her swaying as they left the restaurant. He insisted on driving her home, but Claire mumbled she could not remember her address. The bourbon had hit hard, her thoughts a jumble. Dan sighed and took her to his penthouse instead, a sleek space high above the city. He helped her to the couch, her steps unsteady. Claire slumped down, her eyes half closed. In her haze, she heard his voice, deep and familiar. It tugged at a memory. The coffee shop, the contract. She murmured his name, Dan, and reached for him, her arms wrapping around his neck. She thought he was the man from that day, the one who had saved her mother. Dan froze, caught off guard. Claire's touch was warm, her breath soft against his cheek. For a moment he did not pull away. The room felt still, the city lights glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Then Claire's hand slipped and she leaned closer, her lips brushing his jaw. Dan's resolve wavered. He could have stopped it, but something in her vulnerability, her trust, held him there. The moment stretched, unspoken, until he gently guided her back to the couch. He pulled the curtains shut, the room darkening as he stepped away. Claire drifted off, unaware of the line they had nearly crossed. Morning light woke Claire, harsh and unforgiving. She blinked, realizing she was not home. She wore Dan's oversized dress shirt, her dress folded neatly nearby. Panic surged through her. She scrambled up, finding Dan in the kitchen, sipping coffee. He looked calm, his suit replaced by a plain sweater. Claire asked what happened, her voice trembling. Dan met her gaze and said she had been too drunk to go home, so he brought her here. He added firmly that he had not taken advantage of her, that she had slept on the couch. Claire nodded, relief mixing with confusion. She remembered reaching for him, the warmth of his skin, but said nothing. Dan drove her home in silence, the city waking up around them. Claire stared out the window, her mind racing. She thanked him as she stepped out, her voice small. Dan watched her go, his hands tight on the wheel. Back at his penthouse, he stood by the window, replaying the night. Claire's touch lingered in his mind, stirring something he could not name. He had always kept people at arm's length, but she was different. He wondered why she felt so familiar, why her presence unsettled him. At her apartment, Claire sank onto her bed, the borrowed shirt still carrying his scent. She felt a pull toward him, a connection she could not explain. Work grew tense after that. Rachel and Jake doubled down, spreading rumors that Claire was cozying up to the boss. Claire overheard them in the break room, their words sharp. She confronted them, her voice steady as she denied it. Rachel smirked, saying no one believed her. Claire walked away, her fists clenched. She threw herself into her tasks, determined to rise above the gossip. Dan noticed her effort, calling her into his office one day. He said her work stood out, that she had a future here. Claire smiled, grateful, but her heart raced at his closeness. She left quickly, afraid of what she felt. That night, Dan sat alone in his office, the city dark beyond the glass. He pulled Claire's file, scanning her name. Claire Donovan. It nagged at him, a memory just out of reach. He thought of her courage with the bourbon, her quiet strength. He pushed the file aside, his jaw tight. She was just a trainee, he told himself. But as he stared at the skyline, he knew it was more than that. Claire, meanwhile, lay awake, replaying his words. She admired him. Maybe too much. She wondered if he felt anything at all, or if she was just another face in the crowd. Claire Donovan walked through the bustling halls of Reynolds Tech, her heels clicking against the polished floor. 6 months into her trainee role, she had carved out a space for herself, earning nods from colleagues who once dismissed her. The Chicago skyline loomed outside the windows, a constant reminder of how far she had come. She still felt the sting of Rachel Bennett and Jake Sullivan's jealousy, but their barbs mattered less now. Claire had bigger things on her mind, like the upcoming tech conference she had been tapped to help lead. It was a chance to prove herself, and she was not about to let it slip. At her desk, Claire reviewed the conference plans, her notebook filled with scribbled ideas. Daniel Reynolds, the CEO she now called Dan, had taken a more active interest in her work since that night at his penthouse. She tried not to dwell on it, the memory of his shirt on her skin, his steady voice calming her panic. He had kept his distance since, but his praise came more often. Last week he had stopped by her cubicle, saying her latest report was sharp enough to present to the board. Claire had blushed, mumbling a thank you. She felt a pull toward him but pushed it down, focusing on her job. Trouble was brewing beyond the office walls, though Claire did not know it yet. Dan's family was a tangled mess, one he rarely spoke of. His father, George Reynolds, had built Reynolds Tech decades ago, but his personal life was a wreck. Years back, he had an affair, fathering a son named Tyler Reynolds with another woman. Dan had cut ties with George at 18, vowing to make his own way. Tyler, though, stayed close, his resentment festering. Now, with George aging and frail, Tyler saw a chance to claim the family fortune. He slipped into George's mansion one night, lacing his heart pills with a slow-acting poison, his plan cold and calculated. Claire stumbled into this drama by accident. She had been sent to a luxury hotel downtown to pick up conference materials from a supplier. As she waited in the lobby, she overheard Tyler's voice, sharp and low, coming from a corner booth. He was with a man she did not recognize, talking about George's pills and a will that left everything to him. Claire's pulse raced. She ducked behind a potted plant, straining to hear. Tyler laughed, saying the old man would be gone by week's end. Claire fumbled for her phone, texting Dan a vague warning about trouble at the hotel. She did not know the full story, but something told her he needed to know. Dan got the message during a late meeting. He excused himself, his jaw tight as he called Claire. She whispered what she had heard, her voice shaky. Dan told her to stay put and drove across town, his mind racing. He had suspected Tyler's greed, even hiring a private investigator to track him months ago. The PI had flagged odd purchases, chemicals that matched Claire's story. Dan burst into the hotel, finding Claire by the elevators. She pointed to the booth, now empty. They raced to George's mansion, Dan's car cutting through the Chicago night. They found George slumped in his armchair, his breathing shallow. Dan called 911, his hands steady as he checked his father's pulse. Claire stood by, her heart pounding. Paramedics arrived fast, pumping George's stomach and rushing him to the hospital. Dan stayed silent on the drive, his knuckles white on the wheel. Claire wanted to say something, but the weight of the moment held her back. At the hospital, doctors confirmed the poison, saying they had caught it just in time. George would live, though he needed rest. Dan sat by his father's bed, his face unreadable. Claire lingered in the hall, unsure of her place. George woke briefly, gripping Dan's hand, mumbling an apology for years of neglect. Dan nodded, but said nothing. Claire saw the pain in his eyes and slipped away, giving him space. Back at work, Claire's star rose higher. The tech conference was a month away, and Dan put her in charge of the keynote presentation. She spent nights at the office crafting slides and rehearsing lines. Her efforts paid off when Dorothy Reynolds, Dan's grandmother, stopped by to watch a dry run. Dorothy clapped at the end, her smile wide. She said Claire had a gift, that she reminded her of Dan at that age. Claire beamed, the praise fueling her drive. She also started a side project, organizing a donation drive for kids in Appalachia. She coordinated coats and books, her passion shining through. Word spread, and a local magazine nominated her for a Rising Star in Charity Award. Rachel and Jake watched her rise with growing spite. They teamed up with Tyler, who had dodged charges thanks to a slick lawyer. The three hatched a plan to ruin Claire at the charity gala where her award would be announced. Rachel stole Claire's donation receipts from her desk, replacing them with fakes that showed missing funds. Jake spread rumors among the trainees, saying Claire was a fraud. Tyler fed the story to a gossip blog, hinting at a scandal at Reynolds Tech. Claire noticed the tension at work, the sidelong glances, but she could not pin it down. She kept her head high, trusting her work would speak for itself. Dan caught wind of the plot days before the gala. His PI had tapped Tyler's phone, picking up a call where he bragged about framing Claire. Dan called Claire into his office, his voice calm but firm. He asked if she had noticed anything off. Claire mentioned the whispers, the odd looks. Dan showed her the fake receipts, his eyes narrowing as she confirmed they were not hers. He said he believed her, that he had proof Tyler was behind it. Claire felt a rush of gratitude, mixed with something deeper. Dan's trust meant more than she could admit. He told her to focus on the gala, that he would handle the rest. Claire threw herself into the final prep, her nerves jangling. She spent hours at the library rebuilding her donation records from scratch. She contacted schools and shelters in Appalachia, gathering statements to back her up. The night before the gala, she sat in her apartment, staring at the city lights. She thought of Dan, his quiet support, his steady presence. That night at his penthouse flashed in her mind, the warmth of his closeness. She shook it off, telling herself it was just work, but her heart raced at the thought of him, a feeling she could not name. Dan, meanwhile, sat in his office. The PI's report spread across his desk. Tyler's voice echoed in his head, smug and cruel. He thought of Claire, her courage at the hotel, her drive at work. She was more than a trainee to him now, though he fought to keep that buried. He remembered her arms around him that drunken night, the way she had softened against him. He rubbed his temples, pushing the memory aside. The gala would be her moment, he decided. He would make sure Tyler and his cronies failed. As the city hummed below, Dan felt a resolve settle in, a need to protect her he could not ignore. Claire fell asleep on her couch, her laptop open to the keynote slides. She dreamed of the gala, of standing tall, of Dan's blue eyes watching her. She had no idea how close their lives were about to collide, how the night ahead would change everything. Claire Donovan stepped into the grand ballroom of the Chicago Hilton, her heart pounding under the borrowed navy gown she wore. The charity gala buzzed with energy, chandeliers casting a warm glow over tables draped in white linen. She had spent weeks preparing for this night, her Rising Star in Charity nomination a beacon of hope after months of struggle. The room hummed with chatter from business leaders, philanthropists, and reporters, all gathered to honor good deeds. Claire smoothed her dress, feeling the weight of the moment. She had no idea the storm waiting to crash over her. The evening started smoothly. Claire mingled with guests, her smile steady as she answered questions about her work in Appalachia. She spoke of the coats and books she had sent to kids there, her voice carrying a quiet pride. People nodded, impressed by her story, a college dropout turned do-gooder. She spotted Dan across the room, his dark suit sharp against the crowd. He caught her eye and gave a small nod, a gesture that steadied her nerves. She had grown used to his presence, his quiet support a lifeline she did not fully understand. The program began with a sleek MC taking the stage, his voice booming through the speakers. He ran through the night's agenda, building up to the award announcements. Claire sat at a round table near the front, her hands clasped in her lap. She felt a prickle of unease, a sense that eyes were on her. Rachel Bennett and Jake Sullivan sat 2 tables away. their faces tight with something she could not read. She brushed it off, focusing on the MC as he called her name. The room erupted in applause, and Claire stood, her legs shaky as she walked to the podium. She took the microphone, her voice soft but clear. She thanked the magazine for the nomination, then spoke of Reynolds Tech and the chance it had given her. She was mid-sentence when a voice cut through the air. Tyler Reynolds stormed to the front, his face twisted with fury. He shouted that Claire was a fraud, that her charity was a lie. The crowd gasped, murmurs rippling through the room. Rachel joined him, her heels clicking as she climbed the stage. She held up a stack of papers, claiming they were proof Claire had stolen donation funds. Jake followed, his voice loud as he called her a thief who used pity to climb the ranks. Claire froze, the microphone trembling in her hand. She tried to speak, but Tyler drowned her out, saying she and Dan had cooked the books together. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing. Claire's chest tightened, her mind racing to the missing receipts Rachel had taken. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Rachel waved the fakes, her voice sharp as she asked how a dropout could afford designer pins in her hair. The crowd shifted, doubt creeping into their faces. Claire felt the room spin, her dream crumbling under their lies. Then Dan stepped forward, his presence cutting through the chaos like a blade. He climbed the stage, his blue eyes locked on Tyler. The room fell silent, every eye on him. He took the microphone from Claire, his voice steady as he told everyone to listen. He said Claire was no thief, that he had proof of her innocence. He pulled out his phone and played a recording, Tyler's voice crackling through the speaker. It was a call the PI had tapped, Tyler bragging about framing Claire with fake receipts. Gasps filled the air, heads turning to Tyler, whose smirk faded fast. Dan kept going, his tone calm but firm. He said he had hired a private investigator months ago, suspecting Tyler's schemes after the poisoning attempt on George. He handed the MC a folder, full of emails and bank records showing every penny Claire had raised went to Appalachia. Then he called up witnesses. A principal from a mountain school took the stage, her voice warm as she confirmed Claire's donations matched her lists. A shelter director followed, then a relief worker, each one vouching for her. The crowd's mood shifted, applause breaking out as the truth sank in. Claire stood there, her eyes wide, tears pricking at the corners. She looked at Dan, his face set with determination. He turned to her, lowering the microphone, and said something that stopped her breath. He called her his wife, his legal wife. From a marriage a year ago, neither of them had fully remembered. The room exploded in whispers, reporters leaning forward. Dan explained, his voice softening. He said they had signed a contract to save their mothers, a deal he had forgotten until her name kept tugging at him. He admitted he had fallen for her, not as a trainee, but as the woman she was, brave and kind. Tyler lunged forward, shouting that Dan was lying, that he deserved the family's wealth. Dan cut him off, saying the PI had tied him to the fake receipts and George's poisoning. Security moved in, grabbing Tyler as he thrashed, his curses echoing. Rachel and Jake tried to slip away, but Dan named them too, their faces pale as guards blocked their path. He said they were under investigation for fraud and defamation. Their careers over. The crowd watched, stunned as the trio was led out, Tyler yelling apologies that fell flat. Dan handed the microphone back to Claire, his hand brushing hers. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She finished her speech, her voice stronger now. She said she owed everything to Dan, not just for tonight, but for believing in her when no one else did. She called him the real charity star, a man who warmed lives despite his own cold past. The room clapped, a wave of sound washing over her. Dan stood beside her, his expression soft for the first time she could recall. She felt his gaze, a warmth that made her heart race. As the gala wound down, Claire stepped off the stage, her award in hand. Dan followed, pulling her aside near a quiet corner. He said he had meant every word, that he wanted their marriage to be real, not just paper. Claire stared at him, her mind spinning. She remembered that night at his penthouse, the way he had held her, the trust in his eyes now. She nodded, her voice a whisper as she said she felt it too. Dan smiled, a rare, genuine smile, and pulled her close, the crowd fading into the background. The reporters swarmed after, questions flying about their marriage. Claire let Dan handle it, his arm steady around her. He said they had started as strangers but found something real along the way. He asked her to stay with him, to make it forever. Claire looked up at him, her hazel eyes bright with tears. She said yes, her voice firm despite the chaos. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment, but Claire only saw Dan, his face a promise she wanted to keep. They left the gala together, stepping into the cool Chicago night. Claire clutched her award, her hand in Dan's. She felt lighter, the weight of the past lifting with each step. Tyler, Rachel, and Jake were gone, their schemes undone. Claire knew the road ahead would not be easy, but with Dan beside her she felt ready. The city stretched out before them, alive with possibility, and for the first time, Claire believed she belonged in its light. Claire Donovan stood in the warm glow of Dorothy Reynolds' cozy brownstone, a few miles from Chicago's bustling downtown. It was Daniel Reynolds' birthday, a quiet affair Dorothy had insisted on hosting. The living room smelled of vanilla and cinnamon, a cake cooling on the counter. Claire adjusted the gift bag in her hands, her heart fluttering with a mix of nerves and excitement. After the gala, she and Dan had stepped into something new, their paper marriage turning real. Tonight felt like a milestone, a chance to settle into this unexpected life. Dorothy bustled around, her silver hair catching the light as she set out plates. She had welcomed Claire like family from the start, her sharp eyes softening whenever they talked. Claire liked her, the way she balanced warmth with a no-nonsense edge. Dorothy called Dan over, her voice carrying a playful scold as she told him to stop working for once. Dan emerged from the hall, his usual suit swapped for a sweater, his dark hair slightly mussed. He smiled at Claire, a small, private smile that made her stomach flip. She still could not believe this man, this CEO, was hers. The evening unfolded with easy chatter. Dorothy pulled out old photo albums, showing Claire snapshots of Dan as a kid, all gap-toothed grins and messy hair. Claire laughed, teasing him about a picture where he clutched a Lego spaceship. Dan rolled his eyes, but his grin betrayed him. He said he had loved building things back then, a habit he never quite outgrew. Claire filed that away, glad she had picked the right gift. Dorothy watched them, her smile wide, and said they made a good pair. Claire blushed, her hand brushing Dan's under the table. Dinner was simple. Roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, comfort food that reminded Claire of home. She helped Dorothy clear the plates, the older woman patting her arm as they worked. Dorothy said she had known Claire was special the moment she read her application, that she had a spark Dan needed. Claire smiled, grateful for the faith Dorothy had shown her. Back in the living room, Dan cut the cake, passing Claire a slice. Their fingers touched and she felt that familiar warmth. A quiet connection growing stronger each day. After dessert, Claire handed Dan her gift, a sturdy box wrapped in plain brown paper. He raised an eyebrow, peeling it open to reveal a Lego set, a sleek car model with hundreds of pieces. His face lit up, a boyish grin breaking through his usual calm. He asked how she knew, and Claire said Dorothy's photos had given her the idea. She added that he worked too hard, that this might give him a break. Dan laughed, a sound Claire rarely heard, and said she was right. He opened the box, spilling pieces onto the coffee table, and asked her to help him build it. Claire agreed, settling beside him. They worked together, hands brushing as they snapped bricks into place. Dorothy watched from an armchair, her eyes twinkling. She said it was about time Dan had someone to share his quiet nights, that Claire brought light to their family. Claire smiled, her cheeks warm and focused on the Lego, her fingers steady. The car took shape, sleek and black, a small triumph they built piece by piece. Dan leaned back when they finished, his shoulder against hers. He said it was the best gift he had gotten in years, his voice soft. Claire felt a swell of joy, knowing she had reached him. Later, Dorothy pulled Claire aside, pressing a small bouquet into her hands. It was the same one Dan had ordered for the gala, roses and lilies tied with a ribbon. Dorothy said he had meant to give it to her that night, but the chaos got in the way. She added with a wink that it was for his wife, always had been. Claire's breath caught, her fingers tracing the petals. She looked at Dan, chatting with Dorothy now, and felt a rush of certainty. This was real, not just a contract anymore. She thanked Dorothy, her voice thick, and tucked the flowers close. The night wound down, and Dorothy shooed them out, saying she needed her rest. Claire and Dan stepped onto the brownstone's porch, the city air cool against their skin. He offered to drive her home, but Claire shook her head, saying she wanted to walk with him a while. They strolled through the quiet streets, the skyline glowing in the distance. Claire broke the silence, her voice steady as she said she had been thinking about work. She told him she had submitted her resignation that morning, that she wanted to find her own path now. Dan stopped, his brow furrowing, and asked why. Claire explained, her words careful. She said Reynolds Tech had given her everything, a chance to rise when she had nothing, but she felt ready to step out, to chase a dream she had not named yet. She added that she owed him more than she could repay, that he had changed her life. Dan listened, his face softening. He said the company would miss her, that he would miss her, but he understood. He asked what she would do, and Claire smiled, saying she might start small, maybe a non-profit for kids like the ones in Appalachia. Dan nodded, his eyes bright with pride. They reached a small park, the city lights reflecting off a fountain. Dan stopped, turning to face her. He said he had one more thing to give her, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. It was their marriage license, the one they had signed a year ago. He said their deal was up, that they could end it if she wanted. Claire looked at it, then at him, her heart racing. She said she did not want to end it, that she wanted forever instead. Dan's face broke into a smile, wide and unguarded. He pulled her close, his arms strong around her, and said he wanted that too. They stood there, wrapped in each other, the city humming around them. Claire felt his heartbeat against hers, steady and sure. She thought of the gala, his voice calling her his wife, the way he had fought for her. She thought of that night at his penthouse, the trust she had felt even in her haze. Dan tilted her chin up, his blue eyes searching hers. He said he liked her, really liked her, and was glad it was not a secret anymore. Claire laughed, soft and free, and said she liked him too. They kissed, slow and sweet, the world fading away. The walk ended at Claire's apartment, but Dan followed her up. They stepped onto her tiny balcony, the Chicago skyline stretching before them. Claire leaned against the railing, the bouquet still in her hands. Dan stood beside her, his arm around her waist. She looked out at the city, its lights a promise of new beginnings. She had started with nothing, a desperate deal to save her mother. Now she had Dan, a love she never expected. He whispered that they would figure it out together, whatever came next. Claire nodded, her voice firm as she agreed. The night settled around them, calm and clear. Claire felt a peace she had not known before, a sense that she belonged, not just to this city, but to him. Their story had begun with a contract, a cold exchange in a coffee shop, but it ended here, on this balcony, with a love built from trust and time. She rested her head on his shoulder, the skyline glowing, and knew this was only the start.
The grand chandelier bathed the lavish wedding hall in golden light, but the atmosphere felt suffocating. Whispers filled the air, guests exchanging puzzled glances. A wedding without a groom. Everyone was talking about it. Aria Bennett stood alone at the altar, gripping her bouquet so tightly her fingers turned ice cold. This wasn't a dream. This was a sentence. In the front row, Celeste Bennett, her sister, sat with her legs elegantly crossed, showing no sign of sorrow. Celeste was supposed to be the bride today, but when Damien's accident left him in a coma, she had refused. And with the Bennett family on the brink of financial ruin, their parents had pushed Aria to take her place. She glanced around the crowd, not a single smile in sight. "Aria Bennett, do you take Damien Lancaster as your lawfully wedded husband?" The officiant's voice rang out. Her breath hitched. The words felt foreign, unnatural, like shackles tightening around her. She glanced at the empty space beside her, where a groom should have stood. Her fingers trembled against the cold metal of the ring, and for a fleeting moment, she considered running, but there was nowhere to go, nowhere to escape. She was trapped. Arya looked down at the glittering ring in her trembling hands. The man she was about to marry couldn't even hear her vows. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to speak the words fate had chosen for her. "I do." The scratch of a pen against paper was the only sound in the silent hall. No kiss, no applause, only cold, suffocating silence. Arya stood motionless as the nurse signed the marriage certificate, finalizing a union that only one party was conscious for. Damien Lancaster, her husband in name, lay unmoving in a hospital bed, completely unaware that his life had just changed. After the ceremony, she was taken to the Lancaster estate, a place of unimaginable wealth and power. But it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a gilded cage. As she stepped through the grand entrance, all eyes fell on her. She was not welcome here. Victoria Lancaster, Damien's mother, eyed her coldly. "Remember one thing, Arya," she said, voice soft but sharp as a blade. "You may carry the Lancaster name, but you will never be part of this family." Arya didn't argue. She knew she was nothing more than a pawn in their game. The whispers followed her through the halls. "She's only here for the money, just another gold digger." But Arya didn't care. She wasn't here for love or acceptance. She was here because she had no choice. When she entered her assigned bedroom, she noticed immediately it was far from Damien's. A silent message that, despite their legal bond, they were worlds apart. She stood at the window, staring at the distant city lights. Her life had changed forever, and not in the way she had ever wished for. Arya wasn't an opportunist, nor was she a mindless pawn in the Lancaster family's game. If she had to live in this marriage, she would do it on her own terms. Every morning, she visited Damien in his grand but lifeless room, where the steady beeping of machines was the only sign he was still there. No one besides the doctors and nurses spent time with him. No one truly cared. She sat beside his bed, gently taking his motionless hand. "Good morning, Damien," she whispered, knowing he couldn't hear her. "How are you feeling today?" No response, only silence. But Arya didn't give up. Every day, she read to him, adjusted his pillows, ensured the nurses followed the correct procedures. She brought fresh flowers into his room, trying to make it feel less like a tomb. At first, the household staff scoffed at her, but slowly, the whispers began to change. "I thought she was just here for the money, but she actually takes care of him. Maybe she's not as heartless as we assumed." One evening, while searching for a book in the mansion's vast library, Arya stumbled upon a locked drawer in Damien's study. Curious, she searched for a key but found nothing. Instinct told her something important was hidden inside. After a moment of hesitation, she used a hairpin to pick the lock. The drawer slid open, revealing a thick folder. It was an investigative report on Damien's accident. A report that the Lancaster family had commissioned from a private investigator shortly after the incident. As she flipped through the pages, her breath caught in her throat. The crash hadn't been an accident. The records showed Damien's brakes had been deliberately tampered with. And the worst part? The Lancaster family had covered it up. Why? Who was hiding the truth? And more importantly, who had tried to kill her husband? Arya couldn't sleep. After discovering the investigative report, questions consumed her mind. If the Lancaster family had known the truth from the start, why hadn't they done anything? Who was behind the accident? And why did they want Damien dead? She sat beside Damien's bed, gazing at his peaceful but lifeless face. "Who did this to you?" she whispered. She didn't expect an answer, but at that moment, his finger twitched. Her heart stopped. She held her breath, waiting, but nothing else happened. Had she imagined it? The next day, she couldn't focus. The image of Damien's hand moving haunted her. The soft patter of rain against the window blended with the steady rhythm of Damien's breathing. The room was bathed in its usual silence, the kind of silence Arya had grown used to over the past few weeks. She sat in the chair beside his bed, a book open in her lap, though her mind was elsewhere. The doctor had said Damien could wake up at any time, but days had passed, and he remained still. She sighed, reaching for the glass of water on the nightstand. And then she froze. His finger twitched. Her heart stopped. She stared at his hand, waiting for another sign. But nothing happened. She bit her lip. Did I imagine that? The next morning, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling, and that night, as she sat by his bed reading, it happened again. His eyelashes fluttered. She shot to her feet, rushing out the door. Get the doctor, now! Within the hour, Dr. Whitmore arrived, accompanied by the entire Lancaster family. The once quiet room was now thick with tension. 1 second, 2 seconds, then Damien's eyelids slowly lifted. Arya held her breath. He blinked a few times, his unfocused gaze scanning the room before landing on her. She reached for his hand, voice trembling. Damien? He looked at her, those deep blue eyes searching, but empty. Who are you? He rasped. Arya's breath caught. The doctor confirmed what she had feared most. Damien had lost his memory. He didn't remember the accident, his family, and worst of all, he didn't remember her. The Lancasters, instead of acknowledging Arya, only breathed sighs of relief that Damien was awake. And as soon as the news spread, Celeste Bennett returned, tears glistening in her eyes, playing the role of the heartbroken fiancé, as if she had never abandoned him. From the moment Damien opened his eyes, Celeste wasted no time. She clung to him, tears streaming down her face, weaving tales of a passionate love they had shared. She painted a perfect story, a deep romance, a promised future, a life that should have been filled with happiness, if not for the accident. Arya stood quietly in the corner, pushed aside like an outsider. Damien had no reason to doubt Celeste. He remembered nothing, and when Celeste turned to Arya, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "Thank you for taking care of Damien while he was recovering, but now he has me." Arya didn't respond. She knew arguing wouldn't change anything. Instead of trying to force Damien to remember, she chose to stand by his side silently. In the days that followed, Arya continued to help him recover. She never spoke about the past, never pressured him to recall forgotten memories. She simply helped him move forward. Whenever Damien grew frustrated with the grueling physical therapy, Arya stood beside him, not pushing, not pitying, just present. Whenever he lashed out in irritation, struggling to remember things that should have been familiar, she listened, without judgment. And little by little, Damien started to trust her. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden, his first time outside since waking up, Damien suddenly asked, "Why don't you ever talk about the past?" Arya paused. She looked into his deep blue eyes, filled with too many questions. After a long silence, she softly replied, "Because it's not who you were that matters, but who you choose to be now." Damien didn't know how to respond, but that single sentence made him start questioning everything Celeste had told him. Arya couldn't let this end here. She knew Damien's accident hadn't been an accident, but the Lancaster family had buried the investigation not because they were guilty, but because reputation mattered more than truth. At first, when the crash happened, they had hired a private investigator, but when the evidence pointed toward someone within their own circle, they chose to stay silent. If Damien never woke up, the truth would remain buried forever. But now, he was awake, and Arya wouldn't let the past be erased. For nights, she searched tirelessly, following financial trails and hidden reports. And then she found it. A large transaction made to an auto repair shop just days before the accident. The sender? Celeste Bennett. The garage sat on the outskirts of the city, hidden down a deserted street. The air reeked of oil and burning metal. The man behind the counter, a grizzled mechanic, eyed her warily. "What do you need?" Arya placed the documents on the counter. "I want to know who paid you this money." He glanced at the numbers, his expression shifting. "I don't know what you're talking about." Arya clenched her fists. It was Celeste Bennett, wasn't it? His jaw tightened, a moment of hesitation, then he exhaled. "I don't know who you are, lady, but you shouldn't get involved in this." "Celeste hired you to sabotage Damien's brakes?" Silence. Then finally, he nodded. Yes. Arya's heart clenched. The next day, she confronted Celeste, slamming the evidence onto the table. Celeste merely smirked. "And what if I did?" she said, shrugging. "The Lancaster family has known for months. If they didn't do anything, what makes you think you can?" But the truth always found a way to surface. That night, during the grand celebration, Damien suddenly tensed. A sharp pain pierced through his temple. And then he remembered. He remembered Celeste standing in the distance, watching with a satisfied smile. Everything became clear. He stood, raising his glass. The room fell into silence. "I remember everything." He remembered everything. He remembered leaving the engagement party, the screech of his tires as he lost control, and most importantly, he remembered Celeste. She had been standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, her eyes cold and unfeeling as she watched his car spiral out of control. No panic, no fear, just satisfaction. Slowly, Damien turned to face her, his voice raw with betrayal. "You did this," he said, each word heavy with anger. "You tried to kill me." Celeste stiffened, but only for a moment. Then she smirked, her voice dripping with amusement. "Oh, Damien." Her voice wavered between a smirk and desperation. "Don't you get it? Everything you own should have been mine. You were supposed to die." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Celeste's composure cracked. She whirled toward Victoria Lancaster, her voice rising. "You knew, didn't you? You all knew. And yet you stood there, pretending I was your perfect choice." The Lancaster family gasped in shock. Victoria Lancaster, Damien's mother, stepped forward, her voice ice cold. "Celeste, from this moment on, you are no longer part of this family. Get out." Celeste turned to her own parents, but they merely shook their heads in disappointment. "We have no daughter," her father said flatly. For the first time, fear flickered in Celeste's eyes. She had lost everything. After Celeste was gone, the atmosphere in the Lancaster estate shifted completely. No more whispers of doubt, no more cold stares. Arya continued to care for Damien, but this time it wasn't out of duty. She helped him take slow, steady steps, patiently staying by his side whenever frustration took over. She listened not just to his words, but to everything he couldn't say. And Damien changed too. He began to notice the little things about her, the way she bit her lip when nervous, the way she gently squeezed his hand for encouragement, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about books. Every time he looked at her, a strange sense of familiarity stirred inside him. Not from his lost memories, but from his heart. Even the household staff noticed. She's not an opportunist like we thought. She actually cares about him. Victoria Lancaster, who had once dismissed Arya, began to see her differently. One evening, as Arya helped Damien walk down the hall, Victoria watched them from afar. For the first time, she didn't see a helpless girl or an intruder, but a woman of quiet strength and unwavering devotion. And finally, she admitted to herself. She didn't just save Damien, she changed him. As the days passed, the love between Arya and Damien grew, not through grand gestures, but through small, quiet moments. They often sat together in the Lancaster estate's rose garden, Arya reading aloud to Damien, her soft voice blending with the breeze. Damien no longer listened just to the words on the page. He listened to her. One afternoon, as the golden sunlight filtered through the flowers, Arya was lost in her book, completely unaware of the way Damien's gaze lingered on her. And then, without warning, he reached out, gently tilting her chin up. She blinked in surprise, but before she could speak, his lips met hers. A soft, fleeting kiss, but one that sent her heart racing. Their love didn't come like a storm. It came like the morning sun, rising slowly but inevitably. A few weeks later, the Lancaster family hosted a grand party. No more doubts, no more distance. Under the warm glow of chandeliers, amidst laughter and celebration, Damien suddenly stood up and took Arya's hand in front of everyone. She gasped as he dropped to one knee. "Arya Bennett, for the first time, I am not bound by duty. For the first time, I am not being forced into anything, and for the first time in my life, I know exactly what I want." He opened a small velvet box, revealing a dazzling ring. "I want you. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Arya's eyes, but there was no hesitation. "Yes." Applause erupted around them, and this time, it was a blessing, not an obligation. The wedding day finally arrived. This time, Damien stood at the end of the aisle, waiting for Arya. Not as an unconscious groom, not as part of a forced arrangement, but as a man eagerly waiting for the woman he loved. Arya walked down the aisle in a stunning white gown, her eyes shimmering with happiness. No fear, no uncertainty, only love. The ceremony was filled with warmth, surrounded by genuine blessings from family and friends. But the most touching moment came when Damien took Arya's hands and spoke from the heart. He gazed into her eyes, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "Arya, I may never remember our past. But that doesn't matter anymore, because I will spend my life creating new memories with you. Thank you for standing by me when I was at my weakest. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't even believe in myself. And most of all, thank you for loving me." Tears glistened in Arya's eyes, but they were tears of pure joy. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Damien wasted no time pulling her into a deep, passionate kiss. The room erupted in applause, petals rained down around them. And this time, as they walked hand in hand out of the chapel, they knew this wasn't just a wedding, it was a true beginning. The grandfather clock in the Grand Lancaster estate struck 11, its deep chimes echoing through the vast hallways. Alina Carter gently closed the leather-bound storybook, careful not to disturb Sophie, the 5-year-old battling sleep with all the determination a child could muster. "Just one more story, Miss Elena," Sophie pleaded, clutching her favorite teddy bear, blue eyes shimmering with hope, her golden curls spilled messily across the silk pillowcase of the king-size bed. Elena shook her head, brushing a gentle hand through the little girl's soft locks. "It's way past your bedtime, sweetheart. Let me take you back to your room." Sophie's bottom lip quivered. "But I want to wait for Daddy. He promised he'd try to come home early tonight." The words struck a chord deep in Elena's chest. William Lancaster, CEO of Lancaster Industries, was a man of many things. Powerful, brilliant, devastatingly handsome, but early had never been in his vocabulary. In the 6 months she had worked as Sophie's nanny, Elena had watched hope fade from the little girl's eyes, night after night. "Your father has important meetings, remember?" Elena kept her voice gentle, though frustration simmered beneath the surface. Sophie deserved more than empty promises. Sophie lowered her gaze, her voice a mere whisper. "He always has meetings. I just want him to kiss me goodnight, like he used to." Elena's chest tightened. Sophie rarely spoke of her mother, Clara, the woman who had abandoned her 3 years ago, leaving William to raise their daughter alone. After a moment of hesitation, Elena sighed. "All right, we can wait a little longer, but only until you fall asleep." Sophie's face lit up, and she snuggled deeper into the covers. Elena knew this was a mistake. She was crossing a forbidden line, stepping into William Lancaster's private world. The master bedroom was grand, yet unexpectedly intimate. Dark wood furniture, Egyptian cotton sheets in deep navy, and the lingering scent of his cologne made her pulse quicken. She told herself she would leave as soon as Sophie was asleep. But the bed was impossibly comfortable. The rhythmic sound of Sophie's breathing was hypnotic. Just for a moment, just until Sophie drifted off completely. And then Elena too surrendered to sleep, completely unaware that William Lancaster was on his way home. The bedroom door creaked open, spilling a sliver of hallway light into the dimly lit room. William Lancaster stood at the threshold, his sharp blue eyes scanning the scene before him. And then, he stilled. On his king-size bed, his daughter Sophie lay curled under the covers, her delicate features more peaceful than he had seen in months. But his attention was drawn to the woman beside her, Elena Carter. His daughter's nanny was fast asleep, her breathing steady, one arm trapped in Sophie's tiny grasp as if the little girl refused to let go. William's brows furrowed. What was she doing in his room? He was a man who valued his privacy. His bedroom was off limits to everyone, and yet here she was. A flicker of displeasure passed through him, but it was quickly replaced by something else. Sophie was sleeping soundly. No tossing, no restless whimpers, no tear-streaked cheeks. William lingered for a long moment, watching them, seeing Sophie so at peace, so content in Elena's presence. Something heavy and unspoken settled in his chest. It wasn't just relief, it was longing, a longing he hadn't even realized he carried. But instead of confronting it, he pushed it aside. His steps were near soundless as he crossed the room. Elena stirred slightly, sensing his presence. Her amber eyes fluttered open. For a brief second, she gazed at him in sleepy confusion, then jerked upright, realization dawning on her. "Mr. Lancaster?" she gasped, immediately sitting up without waking Sophie. I can explain." William lifted a hand, silencing her. His gaze didn't leave his daughter. There was a softness in Sophie's expression, a piece that had been missing for too long. He sat on the edge of the bed, loosening his tie with a quiet sigh. "Does she do this often?" Elena hesitated, then nodded. "Every night." Something flickered in William's eyes, something dangerously close to regret. But as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by his usual unreadable mask. At last, he turned to her, voice low but firm. "Stay." Elena blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Excuse me?" William leaned back in his seat, still watching Sophie. "If she wakes up and you're not here, she'll cry." His words were neither an order nor a plea, just a fact. Elena hesitated. She had never seen William Lancaster like this, exhausted, contemplative, and just a little lonely. She could refuse. She should refuse. But looking down at Sophie, still clinging tightly to her, Elena knew she couldn't walk away. "All right," she whispered. "I'll stay." William didn't respond, merely giving a slight nod. But just as he shifted in his seat, Elena heard him murmur under his breath. So soft it was barely more than a thought. "I never realized what I was missing." When Elena woke the next morning, the first thing she noticed was that William Lancaster was gone. Only Sophie remained, still curled up beside her, golden curls a tangled mess against the silk pillow. But on the nightstand, a small note with bold, precise handwriting made Elena's breath catch. "Early meeting. Sophie was still asleep. I moved her to her room before I left. We need to talk. My office, 7 p.m. WL." Elena clutched the note, her pulse quickening. She couldn't stop thinking about the strange silence between her and William last night, about the way he had looked at Sophie, with something unspoken in his gaze. The day passed in its usual rhythm, preparing Sophie's breakfast, overseeing her lessons, accompanying her in the sprawling Lancaster estate gardens. But there was a shift that Elena couldn't ignore. William was trying. He came home earlier than usual, making an appearance at dinner, a rare occurrence. And he didn't just nod at Sophie before retreating to his study. He actually listened. Elena watched from a distance, unable to deny the warmth that spread through her chest as Sophie beamed up at her father. But what unsettled her most was the way William looked at her. That evening, at exactly 7 p.m., Elena stepped into William's office. He wasn't behind his desk as she had expected. Instead, he stood by the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading sunset. "Mr. Lancaster, about last night." He turned, piercing blue eyes meeting hers. "Elena, drop the formalities." She blinked. "What do you mean?" William took a measured step forward, his voice low but certain. "Sophie adores you, and I trust you more than anyone else. There's no need for unnecessary distance between us." Elena opened her mouth to protest, but something in his expression, so unwavering, so sincere, made her hesitate. She swallowed. "All right." "William." A flicker of a smile crossed his face, so brief yet it made her heart skip a beat. She had crossed the first boundary, and she knew that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The whispers started the next morning. Elena noticed it immediately. The stolen glances from the staff, the hushed conversations that died the moment she entered the room. Even Mrs. Reynolds, the Lancaster housekeeper, regarded her with a sharper gaze than usual. Elena tried to ignore it, but as she passed through the kitchen, she caught two maids gossiping about her. Who does she think she is, from a nanny to the master's bed? Please, it's probably just a fling. Men like him don't take women like her seriously. Elena clenched her fists, her chest tightening with frustration. She had done nothing wrong, but that didn't stop the rumors from spreading. And soon, she understood exactly where they had started. Because that morning, a familiar name appeared in the society pages. Vanessa Sterling, William's ex-fiancée. The perfect, stunning, powerful woman who had once nearly become Mrs. Lancaster. And now, she was back in town. The article didn't mention Elena outright, but the implication was clear. Vanessa Sterling returns after years abroad. Could there be a second chance for love? The warning. Elena's stomach twisted. She knew William wasn't the type to let the past dictate his future, but she couldn't ignore one undeniable truth. Vanessa belonged in his world. And she did not. But before she could dwell on it any longer, an even bigger storm arrived. A woman appeared at the Lancaster estate gates, her eyes burning with anger and intent. Clara, Sophie's biological mother, the woman who had abandoned her daughter 3 years ago. And now she was back with a clear purpose. She wanted Sophie back. News of Clara's return spread quickly. Elena was preparing Sophie's breakfast when Mrs. Reynolds appeared, her expression grim. "Miss Elena, there's something you need to see." A thick envelope lay on the table, the handwriting scrawled across it uneven. Elena opened it, and her stomach dropped. Inside were dozens of photographs, each one deliberately arranged. Her leaving homes late at night, hugging children goodbye, standing at the doorsteps of wealthy families. They were all families she had worked for, but to an outsider, they told a completely different story. A single note slipped onto the table. "Leave quietly, or these photos go straight to the Lancaster board. They won't believe you're innocent. V.S." Elena's grip tightened, her fingers trembling. Her pulse pounded in her ears. If these photos got out, the whispers wouldn't just be whispers anymore. They would be knives, cutting through her reputation, her life, and worst of all, Sophie's happiness. Vanessa. Of course it was her, but before she could think of what to do, William entered the kitchen. Sophie ran up to him instantly, wrapping her arms around his legs. "Daddy, Miss Elena made me pancakes." Then Elena forced herself to smile, to hide the fear gripping her chest. But William was already watching her closely. She couldn't let him know. She couldn't let Sophie know. And then Clara walked in, right into the grand Lancaster living room. She stood there, her red-brown hair disheveled, but her eyes blazing with determination. "I want my daughter back." The room fell deathly silent. Then, William spoke, his voice cold as steel. "You abandoned Sophie 3 years ago. You have no rights here." Clara smiled, a slow, victorious curve of her lips. "You think so? Let's see what the courts have to say." And then she dropped the final bomb. "Oh, and by the way, I think the Lancaster board will be interested in this. Sophie isn't your biological daughter. Sophie isn't William's biological daughter." Clara's words cut through the room like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. Elena turned to William. He didn't look surprised. There was no shock, no denial, only a deadly calm in his piercing blue eyes as he stared at Clara. He had known. Elena felt her heart constrict. Clara folded her arms, smirking. "You have no legal claim over her, William. She's not yours." "But she is mine." William was frighteningly composed. He stepped forward, his voice slow, deliberate. "Being a parent isn't about biology, it's about responsibility, and you abandoned yours a long time ago." Clara blinked but held her ground. "The law doesn't care about your emotions. I have every right to take her back." "No, you don't." William walked to his desk, pulled open a drawer, and retrieved a thick stack of documents. He tossed them onto the table, his gaze razor-sharp. "You never paid a cent in child support. You haven't contacted her in 3 years. You have a record of debt, evictions from at least 3 different apartments." He tilted his head, a cold smile playing at his lips. "You think a judge will hand her over to you?" Clara went pale, but William wasn't finished. He threw another file onto the desk. "And here's proof of your financial transactions with Vanessa Sterling. You took her money right before you came back into town." The room fell silent. William slowly crossed his arms, voice dripping with disdain. "You sold your daughter twice, Clara, and now you think you deserve her back?" Clara had no response. Her hands trembled, her face ghostly white. At last, she cast a furious glare at Elena, as if this was somehow her fault, before turning on her heel and storming out without another word. William watched her disappear, his shoulders finally relaxing as if a weight had been lifted. Elena stood frozen, her heart pounding. She swallowed. "You knew, didn't you?" William turned, his blue eyes locking onto hers, sharp but impossibly gentle. "I've known for a long time," he admitted, "but it never mattered." Elena forgot to breathe. William stepped closer, his gaze burning into her. "Family isn't about DNA, Elena. Family is about who stays, who fights, who loves unconditionally. And I chose Sophie from the moment I held her in my arms, and I will keep choosing her, no matter what." Elena couldn't look away, but before she could respond, a small voice came from the door. "Daddy?" Sophie stood there, wide blue eyes looking up at them, voice small. "Do I have to leave?" Elena felt her heart shatter, but William didn't hesitate for a second. He crouched down, opening his arms. "No, sweetheart, you are always staying, I promise." Sophie ran into his embrace, burying her face against his chest. "I love you, Daddy." William held her close, his gaze flickering up to Elena's. A silent promise. Everything had finally settled. A few days later, William's lawyers confirmed that Clara had officially withdrawn her custody case. With no chance of winning, she disappeared from the city without a trace. Vanessa Sterling had also lost. After evidence of her manipulating the scandal and bribing Clara was exposed, her reputation was utterly destroyed. But for Elena, the greatest victory wasn't in defeating Clara or Vanessa. It was in seeing Sophie laugh more, sleep soundly, and no longer fear being abandoned. One late afternoon, Elena stood in the Lancaster estate garden, watching Sophie play with William under the golden glow of the setting sun. The little girl ran towards them, eyes sparkling. "Daddy, Miss Elena, can I make a wish?" William knelt, pulling Sophie into his arms. "What do you wish for, princess?" Sophie looked between them, then beamed. "I wish we could always be a family." William chuckled, his gaze soft as it rested on Elena. "Then you don't have to wish for it, Sophie, because that will always be true." He reached for Elena's hand, his grip firm and sure. "Family is a choice, and I choose you, Elena, forever." Elena squeezed his hand back, her heart overflowing. She had spent her life searching for a place to belong, never knowing it would find her instead. And now, as she looked at William and Sophie, their family, their home, their forever, she realized she had never been more certain of anything in her life. Elena Carter strode through the lobby of a Chicago high-rise, her heels clicking against the glossy marble floor. She had just left one of the worst meetings of the month, stubborn clients, a dissatisfied boss, and a nagging doubt about whether all of this effort was even worth it. She glanced at her phone one more time. No messages from her superiors. Maybe that was a good thing. She wasn't in the mood for more criticism. With a sigh, she pressed the elevator button, her eyes still scanning an unfinished email. The soft ding of the elevator sounded. She stepped forward without looking and, thud, collided hard with someone entering from the opposite side. "Oh, sorry," they spoke in unison, and as Elena looked up, she met a pair of sharp, stormy gray eyes. The man in front of her was tall, impeccably dressed in a deep navy suit. His dark hair was neatly styled, but what caught her attention was the vintage watch he kept adjusting on his wrist. "After you," he said with a polite smile, his voice carrying a faint East Coast lilt. Elena stepped inside, moving to the side as he followed. The doors closed with a soft whoosh, and the elevator began its ascent. But seconds later, it jolted violently. Then stopped altogether. Elena pressed the emergency button. No response. "Attacking it won't help," the man remarked, amusement in his tone. Elena crossed her arms, casting him a sideways glance. "Do you have a better suggestion?" Elena leaned against the elevator wall and sighed. "This is the perfect way to end an already terrible day," she muttered. The man beside her tilted his head, intrigued. "How terrible are we talking?" She studied him for a moment before deciding to answer. Clients who refused to listen. I pitched a bold new design, but all they wanted was a slightly different version of something they've seen 100 times. He nodded knowingly. "Sounds familiar." "What do you do?" she asked. "Investments," he said simply. "I run a firm that funds new projects." Elena let out a small laugh. "So you're one of the people who only care about the bottom line?" "Not exactly." He glanced down at his watch, adjusting it absent-mindedly. "Sometimes the bottom line isn't the most important thing." She was about to ask what he meant, but suddenly the emergency lights flickered on, casting a soft blue glow around them. The atmosphere shifted, more intimate, more personal. Elena slid down to the floor and pulled off her heels. "I don't know how long we'll be stuck here, but I'm not standing the whole time." The man regarded her for a moment before loosening his tie and lowering himself to the floor, maintaining a polite distance. "Damien, by the way." "Helena," she replied, resting her head back against the elevator wall. "Do you get stuck in places like this often?" He chuckled. "No, but I have to say this is the most interesting time it's happened." They talked about little things that somehow felt important. Damien mentioned how cooking was his escape from stress, and Elena reminisced about her childhood, building tiny paper houses in her room, dreaming of being an architect. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden crackle from the elevator intercom. "Is anyone in there?" Elena jumped up. "Yes, we're here. We're working on the issue. Should have you out in about 15 minutes. She exhaled in relief, but when she turned back to Damien, she caught something in his gaze, something almost reluctant. "Just 15 more minutes," he murmured. "What should we talk about?" That night, Elena lay awake, replaying the conversation in the dim elevator, the quiet laughs, the way Damien fidgeted with his watch, the way he listened. She had no reason to think she'd see him again, but somehow, she wished she would. 3 days later, Elena sat in her firm's main conference room, absent-mindedly chewing on her pen as she reviewed the project brief. The morning sun streamed through the glass windows, casting long shadows across the city skyline, but her thoughts were still trapped in that stalled elevator. She had tried to forget Damien, the mysterious stranger with storm-gray eyes and a voice that had stayed with her long after they parted. She hadn't even known his full name. But when her laptop screen displayed the client profile for their newest project, her breath caught in her throat. Damien Wolf, CEO of Wolf Enterprises. Her heart skipped a beat. She flicked a glance at her colleague, Madison, who was buzzing with excitement. "He's coming in today," Madison whispered, barely containing her enthusiasm. Damien Wolf, the investment genius, CEO of one of the biggest firms in the country. Elena forced herself to focus. She skimmed the project summary. Wolf Enterprises was seeking an interior design firm to renovate their headquarters. Landing this project would be a game changer for her career. But how was she supposed to stay professional when the man from the elevator was now her most important client? Before she could gather her thoughts, the conference room doors swung open. A group of executives entered, and leading them was Damien. He hesitated for the briefest of moments when his eyes met hers, a flicker of surprise, just a heartbeat's worth of recognition, before he masked it beneath a composed expression. "Thank you for having us," Damien said smoothly, his voice calm and collected. Elena gripped her pen tighter, forcing her own voice to remain steady. "A pleasure to be working with you, Mr. Wolf." Elena spent the next 2 days burying herself in work, doing her best to ignore Damien's presence. but no matter how focused she tried to be, she could feel his eyes on her during meetings. No matter how professional they both acted, the tension between them hovered like an unspoken secret. On Thursday evening, as she was clearing her desk, a new email popped up on her screen. From Damian Wolf. Subject, design inspiration. Elena, since we're keeping things strictly professional, I thought you might be interested in some reference materials for the project. Attached are a few space designs I find inspiring. Completely unrelated, but there's a small jazz club on 8th Street that plays incredible music on Thursday nights. I also hear their mac and cheese isn't bad. Professionally, Damian. Elena stared at the email, her pulse quickening. She shouldn't go. It was unprofessional. It was complicated. But then she imagined Damian sitting there, sipping his drink, waiting, maybe hoping. Before logic could stop her, she was slipping on her coat and stepping into a cab. The jazz club was small but intimate, the warm glow of dim lighting blending with the soulful hum of a saxophone. She chose a table near the back, telling herself this was just a night out, nothing more. Okay. She looked up and met Damian's gaze. He wasn't wearing a suit tonight, just a deep navy sweater that made him look softer, less distant. "This isn't a date," she said immediately. Damian smirked as he sat across from her. Of course not. Just two people who happened to enjoy jazz at the same place and time. They talked. They laughed. And then, as a slow ballad played, Damian extended his hand. "Dance with me." Elena glanced around. "There's no dance floor." "So well, make one." And there, in the middle of a jazz club with no designated space for dancing, she let herself fall into his arms. The moment Elena stepped into the office the next morning, she could feel it. The stolen glances, the hushed whispers that quieted as she passed, the way Madison immediately intercepted her at the door. "What's going on?" Elena frowned. Madison shot a glance toward the conference room before pulling her aside. "Richardson knows about last night." Elena stiffened. "What about last night?" "You having dinner with Damian Wolf." Madison lowered her voice. "Walsh saw you at the jazz club, and now the partners are discussing whether to remove you from the project." Elena felt like a stone had dropped into her stomach. "They can't do that." "You know they can," Madison sighed. "They're saying you got the project because of your connection to Damian." Anger flared inside Elena. "I worked my ass off for this project. If they think—" "Shh," Madison cut her off, glancing around. "Richardson is in a meeting with the senior partners. They're deciding soon." Elena's hands clenched into fists. She had spent weeks pouring herself into this design, and now, because of one dinner, they wanted to erase all of it? No. She wouldn't let that happen. She marched straight to her office, opened her laptop, and began refining her design. If they wanted a reason to keep her, she would give them one. Not with words, but with her work. 3 days later, as the critical meeting began, Elena sat in her usual seat, gripping her pen tightly. The senior partners spoke in turn, but she barely registered their words over the pounding of her own heartbeat. "The revised design has been reviewed," Richardson announced, his voice measured but sharp. "No one is questioning your talent, Elena, but from an objective standpoint, we cannot ignore external influences." Elena sat up straighter, her jaw tightening. "So let me get this straight. You think my work is exceptional, but my personal life invalidates that?" Richardson's lips pressed into a thin line. "Perception matters, Miss Carter." Elena met his gaze without flinching. "Then let me change that perception. Give me 5 minutes to prove why I'm the only person who should lead this project." Before anyone could respond, a deep voice cut through the room. "If Elena isn't leading this project, Wolf Enterprises will reconsider our partnership." The room fell into dead silence. She could hear her own breath. Damian sat at the head of the table, fingers resting against his vintage watch, his expression unwavering. "She's not just the best choice for this project," he continued. "She's the only one who can bring it to life." Richardson looked like he had swallowed ice. After a tense pause, he gave a curt nod. "Very well, Elena will remain the lead designer." As the meeting adjourned and people filed out, Alina remained seated, staring at Damien. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. Damien stepped closer, stopping just before her. "I'm not going to stand by and watch you be denied what you rightfully earned." For the first time in weeks, Elena let her shoulders relax. And for the first time, she stopped running from what she truly wanted. The morning sky over Chicago was clear, but the air carried the crisp bite of winter. Elena stood by the large office window, adjusting the delicate feather pendant around her neck, a gift from Damien. Below, the groundbreaking site was ready. Banners with the Wolf Enterprises logo waved in the wind, and reporters had already gathered. Today wasn't just about launching a project. It was about proving she belonged here. A warm hand touched the small of her back. "Ready?" Damien stood beside her, his gaze filled with quiet pride. Elena smiled. Together. The ceremony unfolded smoothly. Speeches highlighted sustainability and innovation. But when Damien took the stage, his words made the crowd fall silent. Innovation isn't just about technology or architecture. It's about having the courage to break old boundaries, to pursue what truly matters. As they each took hold of a ceremonial shovel, preparing for the first turn of soil, Damien leaned close and whispered, "Dance with me." Elena laughed. "In front of hundreds of people? Why not?" And as applause filled the air, beneath the crisp winter sun, he spun her into an impromptu dance. That evening, Elena sat by her apartment window, journal open in her lap, fingers tracing the small feather pendant around her neck. The necklace wasn't just a gift. It was a reminder of her dreams, her resilience, everything she had built for herself. Damien had given it to her the day she officially secured her role as project lead, along with a simple note. Freedom isn't about running away, it's about knowing where you belong. And Elena knew now she didn't just belong to her work. She belonged to everything she had built, to the future she was brave enough to embrace. Day 82. Today, we didn't just break ground on a building. We broke ground on a future, one where love isn't an obstacle, but a driving force. One where I no longer have to choose between my career and my heart, because I've proven I deserve both. Her phone buzzed, a message from Damien. "Remember when you said some spaces are meant to be filled?" She smiled, her fingers curling around the pendant. "Remember, I think some spaces aren't just meant to be filled, they're meant to be transformed. Like the space between two strangers in an elevator, becoming the foundation for forever." Elena laughed softly, touching the necklace. "Ambitious Mr. Wolf, but lucky for you, I'm a damn good architect." Outside, the city shimmered like an unfinished blueprint, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to take the next step. 3 months later, Elena couldn't remember the last time she felt so at ease. She sat at the grand dining table of the Wolf family home, surrounded by warm laughter and the comforting aroma of homemade lasagna. Damien's mother, a graceful woman with a kind smile, placed another steaming dish on the table. "Eat, dear," she said fondly. "Damien rarely brings anyone home, you know." Elena chuckled, glancing at Damien. "Is that so?" He merely shrugged, a mysterious glint in his eyes. After dinner, Damien took her hand and led her outside. The backyard was bathed in the soft glow of fairy lights, reflecting off the dewy grass in the crisp spring air. Elena's heart pounded as he led her deeper into the garden. Something about his grip felt different, firmer, almost nervous. The air was still, the world quiet, as if waiting. "I wanted to show you this place," Damien said, guiding her to a small table beneath a trellis of blooming flowers. "I grew up here, spent my childhood running through this garden, and now I want it to be the place where something else begins." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. As he flipped it open, a stunning ring caught the warm light. "Elena Carter, you're not just the woman I love. You're the woman who changed me, who showed me that love isn't about sacrifice, it's about building something together. So," he took a breath. "Will you marry me?" Elena brought a hand to her mouth, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She didn't need to think. "Yes," she whispered, then laughed joyfully. 1,000 times yes. 3 months later, springtime in Chicago, the sky was clear and the city lights twinkled like artificial stars. But nothing shone brighter than Elena in her wedding dress. Elegant, graceful, a perfect reflection of her strength and beauty. She stood on the rooftop of a high-rise, the venue they had chosen for their wedding. String lights glowed softly, white roses lined the railings, and the smooth hum of jazz floated through the crisp evening air. Damien waited at the altar, and the moment he saw her, everything else disappeared. The city, the crowd, even the nerves he'd been battling all morning. It all faded into the background. All he saw was Elena, radiant and breathtaking, walking toward him like she'd always belonged there. As she walked toward him, the world around them seemed to fade away. "When we met, the elevator stopped," Damien whispered as he took her hands. "But from that moment on, you made my entire world move." Elena smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I thought I had to choose between love and my career. But then I realized, real love never makes you choose." They exchanged rings, sealed their vows with a kiss, and as applause erupted around them, Damien leaned in and murmured, "Dance with me?" And under the city lights, with jazz humming in the background, they danced. Not just for this moment, but for a lifetime to come. The rain fell relentlessly, droplets hitting the window pane before merging into streaks, mirroring Isla Montgomery's heavy heart. She sat curled up on the window seat of her upscale Manhattan apartment, eyes fixed on the flickering city lights. Not because she loved the rain, but because she didn't want to face reality. At 26, Isla Montgomery was a highly regarded corporate strategist in New York's elite financial circles. To outsiders, she was strong, intelligent, and composed, a woman who never let anything break her. But the truth? Her life had been shaped by loss, betrayal, and loneliness. And tomorrow, her life would no longer be her own, because tomorrow she would marry a man she never loved. Isla Montgomery was born into one of New York's most prestigious families. Her father, Richard Montgomery, was a powerful figure in the financial world. She had grown up surrounded by wealth. But money had never equaled happiness. Her mother, Elena Montgomery, was the kindest woman Isla had ever known. She could still recall the warmth of her mother's embrace, the bedtime stories whispered in the dark. But it all ended when her mother passed away from a terminal illness when Isla was just 10 years old. From that moment, her world turned cold. 3 years later, her father remarried Catherine Montgomery, an ambitious and calculating woman. The first time Isla met her, she knew Catherine would never love her. Catherine never raised her voice, never lashed out physically, but her words were sharper than any blade. "Isla, you shouldn't spend so much time at home. A Montgomery heiress should have friends of her own status. That dress is far too cheap for a Montgomery. But then again, does it even matter? No one notices you anyway." She had once tried to regain her father's love, but it was futile. He never shielded her from Catherine. His work had always been his top priority, and Isla had always been just a shadow in his life. And so she learned the hard way, the only person she could rely on was herself. But no matter how strong she pretended to be, she couldn't deny the truth. Her house had never been a home. Lately, Montgomery Enterprises was standing on the edge of collapse. Massive debts, shareholders losing confidence, failed business deals. It was a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode. Isla didn't care about the company, but she couldn't ignore the growing tension between her father and Catherine. Then, on a stormy night, she was summoned to the living room. The moment she stepped down the stairs, she felt it. Something was wrong. Catherine sat elegantly on the sofa, a glass of wine in her hand, her sharp eyes gleaming with calculation. Across from her, Richard Montgomery looked more exhausted than ever. Catherine spoke first, her voice light but heavy with unspoken pressure. "Montgomery Enterprises is in danger. We need a solution." Isla crossed her arms, raising a brow. "And what does that have to do with me?" Catherine smirked, placing a stack of documents on the table. "You will marry Nicholas Blackwell." The air in the room froze. Isla felt her blood turn to ice. Nicholas Blackwell, the CEO of Blackwell Industries, one of the most powerful conglomerates in the city. He wasn't just wealthy, he was infamous for his cold, ruthless nature. Isla shot up from her seat, her voice scorching the air. "No way, I am not your puppet." Catherine took a slow sip of wine before speaking, utterly unbothered. "Do you think you have a choice? Without Nicholas, the company will crumble. Your father will lose everything." Isla turned sharply to her father, her voice shaking with anger and heartbreak. "Are you really going to let them use me like a bargaining chip?" But Richard Montgomery said nothing. No words of comfort, no words of protest. Just silence. A sharp blade of betrayal pierced straight through Isla's heart. The man she had once admired had sold her like a piece on a chessboard. Catherine tilted her head, amusement flickering in her gaze. "You can hate me all you want, Isla, but the wedding will happen." Isla clenched her fists, her breath unsteady. She looked at her father, waiting, hoping he would say something, anything. But he remained silent. A sharp pain stabbed through her chest. So this was it. The man who was supposed to protect her had just sold her off like a mere business deal. She let out a shaky breath, blinking back the sting in her eyes. And then, slowly, she smirked. A cold, defiant smile. "Fine, I'll marry him, but don't expect me to be obedient." 3 days later, Isla was summoned to one of the most luxurious hotels in New York. When the elevator doors slid open to the top floor, she felt it instantly, the suffocating coldness of the air around her. Stepping into the VIP suite, her gaze landed on the man she was being forced to marry, Nicholas Blackwell. He sat on a sleek black leather sofa, exuding power and detachment. His features were chiseled to perfection, sharp jawline, piercing gray eyes, a face carved from ice. His tailored suit was flawless, not a wrinkle in sight, just like the man himself, ruthless, pristine, and utterly devoid of warmth. Isla smirked, breaking the silence. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwell. I'm Isla Montgomery, also known as your reluctant bride." The air between them grew heavier. Nicholas didn't move, didn't blink. He simply watched her, his gaze sharp, assessing, as if stripping away every layer of her defenses. The way he looked at her made her feel exposed, vulnerable. But she refused to show weakness, so she tilted her head, her smirk deepening. Then, in a low, deep voice, he finally spoke. "I don't care who you are, this is just a business transaction. We marry, live together for a year, then divorce. I have no time for childish games." A heavy weight settled in Isla's chest. She had expected Nicholas to be an emotionless machine, but seeing it firsthand still left a bitter taste in her mouth. Nicholas slid a thick stack of documents toward her. "Read through it. If you agree, sign at the bottom." Isla flipped through the pages, scanning the clauses. No interference in each other's personal lives, no emotional involvement, no public scandals or embarrassment. The contract lasts 5 years, after which divorce is an option. She let out a dry chuckle, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Do you seriously think emotions can be controlled by a contract?" Nicholas remained impassive, his gaze unwavering. "I don't need to control them, because I will never love you." Isla clutched her chest in mock pain. "Oh no, my poor heart shattered to pieces." Nicholas didn't react. His face was as unreadable as ever. She shrugged, picking up the pen and signing her name with deliberate nonchalance. "All right, Mr. Blackwell, I'll play your little game." The wedding was a grand illusion, a luxurious ceremony filled with high-profile guests and flashing cameras, but devoid of love, devoid of warmth. Isla wore a pristine white gown, but inside she felt nothing but ice. When the priest asked, "Nicholas Blackwell, do you take Isla Montgomery as your wife?" Nicholas didn't hesitate. His voice was deep, cold, and utterly emotionless. "I do." Isla raised an eyebrow at him, a smirk playing on her lips. She shrugged and spoke, her tone dripping with amusement. "Well then, I suppose I do too." Nicholas shot her a sharp glance but said nothing. The door to Nicholas's penthouse slammed shut, sealing them away from the outside world. Isla stepped forward, her eyes scanning the space. No roses, no champagne, no romance. Only sleek, modern perfection, cold, lifeless, just like its owner. She crossed her arms, smirking. Well, Mr. Blackwell, this is our wedding night. Don't you think you should at least pretend to treat your wife properly? Nicholas loosened his tie with precise movements, his voice razor sharp. What exactly are you expecting? Isla blinked innocently. Oh, nothing extravagant. Maybe some wine, a pleasant conversation, or just a little affection. Nicholas let out a dry chuckle. Humorless, devoid of warmth. You're wasting both of our time. He set his whiskey glass down, stepping closer. His presence was imposing, suffocating, yet still unreadable. We both know this isn't a real marriage. There's no need to pretend. Isla tilted her head, laughing softly. Are you always like this, cold, rigid, completely devoid of any fun? Nicholas remained silent. He merely removed his watch, placing it neatly on the table. Mechanical, controlled, detached. His indifference irritated her more than anything. She crossed her arms, eyes glinting mischievously. Tell me, Mr. Blackwell, do you even know what a wedding night is supposed to be? Nicholas slid his hands into his pockets, his gaze unwavering. I don't care. Isla smirked, twirling his tie around her fingers. She took a slow step closer, watching him carefully. Then I suppose I'll have to make you care. Nicholas exhaled sharply, his patience wearing thin. He reached for his tie, yanking it from her grasp. Stop testing me. His voice was lower now, edged with warning. Isla only laughed softly, stepping back with a victorious glint in her eyes. Nicholas Blackwell wasn't as unaffected as he pretended to be. Without warning, she grabbed his abandoned tie, twisting it around her fingers before giving it a playful tug. Nicholas stilled. His stormy gray eyes darkened. Just slightly. Isla's voice dropped to a whisper, teasing but firm. Have you read the contract, Nicholas? His jaw tensed, but he didn't move away. Every word. Isla let the tie slip from her fingers, stepping back with a daring smile. Good, then you should remember the first clause. Nicholas held her gaze for a long moment before finally turning away. Don't test me, Isla. The door to the guest bedroom clicked shut behind him. Isla grinned. Nicholas Blackwell had noticed her. And this was just the beginning. 3 weeks after the wedding, Isla's real nightmare began. She was in her office, flipping through a stack of documents, when her phone vibrated, an unknown number. She answered, her voice steady as always. Hello. But the voice on the other end wasn't her father's. It wasn't Catherine's either. It was a stranger's voice, cold, detached, tinged with regret. Is this Isla Montgomery? She frowned. Yes, speaking. We regret to inform you that your father, Mr. Richard Montgomery, passed away this morning due to a sudden heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital, but he didn't make it. The world around Isla shattered in an instant. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. No, that's not possible. Her voice barely escaped her lips. I'm very sorry for your loss. The phone slipped from her fingers, landing on the desk with a soft thud. At that moment, her world collapsed. Richard Montgomery had never truly been a father to her. He had never fought for her, never protected her, but he had still been her only family. And now he was gone. 3 days later, at the funeral, Isla stood motionless by the grave, dressed in black, her face unreadable. The drizzle fell, seeping into her skin, but she felt nothing. Beside her, Nicholas stood silently, his stormy gray eyes watching as Richard Montgomery was lowered into the ground. But for the first time, he realized Isla was different. The woman who was always full of sarcasm, always taunting him, now looked empty, distant, as if she had lost everything. No smirks, no playful defiance, just silence. And for some reason, that unsettled Nicholas. A short distance away, Catherine Montgomery played her role perfectly, the grieving widow, her expression sculpted with just the right amount of sorrow. But Isla knew better. Catherine wasn't mourning, she was waiting. Because when the funeral ended, she finally made her move. Richard is gone, Isla. Catherine's voice was terrifyingly calm. And as of today, Montgomery Enterprises belongs to me. Isla's fists clenched, but her voice remained cold as ice. "You're lying." Catherine chuckled, pulling a stack of documents from her bag and placing them on the table with smug satisfaction. "See for yourself." With trembling hands, Isla flipped through the pages. And then she saw it. Her father's signature at the bottom of the contract. A legal document transferring full ownership of Montgomery Enterprises to Catherine Montgomery. Rage burned in her chest. Isla lifted her gaze, her voice sharp as a blade. "You forced him to sign this, or you forged it." Catherine shrugged, her tone almost amused. "Believe what you want. It doesn't change the fact that I've won." Isla's teeth clenched. She had lost her father, and now Catherine had stolen his entire legacy. But the worst part wasn't over yet. Catherine leisurely pulled out another set of documents and slid them across the table. "If you behave, I might let you keep a small share." Symbolic, of course. Isla slapped the papers away, her eyes blazing. "You think I'd accept this?" Catherine smirked, her gaze dripping with amusement. "Then what will you do? You're powerless, Isla. You have no allies. Who will help you? Nicholas?" Iceland's heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" Catherine pushed another contract toward her, her movements deliberate. "Nicholas and I have already struck a deal. If he collaborates with me, Blackwell Industries will receive a large stake in Montgomery Enterprises." Isla stared at the words. No, this couldn't be real. Nicholas had betrayed her? That night, at Nicholas's penthouse, Isla stormed into the room, her eyes burning with fury. "You did this, didn't you?" She threw the documents onto the table, her voice shaking with bitterness. "You made a deal with Catherine. You betrayed me." Nicholas glanced at the papers, then up at her. But what broke her the most was that he didn't deny it immediately. The silence cut deeper than any blade. She let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. "I was a fool to think you were different." Nicholas's face remained unreadable, but his eyes held something deeper. "Is that what you think?" Isla gritted her teeth. "Then explain yourself." Nicholas exhaled, pushing the documents aside. "I was never on Catherine's side. I only pretended to work with her to bring her down." Isla froze. "What?" Nicholas stood, stepping toward her. His gaze was no longer cold, but resolute. "I'm going to help you take back the company." Isla searched his eyes for deception, but for the first time, she saw sincerity. She took a slow breath, then nodded. "All right, let's take Catherine down together. In war, the most important thing is a powerful ally, and Isla had no choice but to put her trust in Nicholas Blackwell." That night, they sat across from each other in Nicholas's penthouse office. Isla folded her arms, her gaze sharp. "So what's your plan?" Nicholas flipped open a file, sliding it toward her. Isla glanced down. Inside were stacks of documents related to Montgomery Enterprises. "We have 3 steps," Nicholas said, his voice firm. 1. Find a loophole in Catherine's inheritance contract. 2. Weaken her position with the shareholders. 3. Take back control during the next board meeting. Isla frowned, flipping through the pages. "And do you actually have any proof?" Nicholas smirked slightly, pulling out another set of documents. "I have the best legal team in New York. They reviewed Catherine's contract and found signs of fraud." Isla's head snapped up, her heart pounding. "Are you saying we actually have a chance?" Nicholas nodded, his eyes sharp and unwavering. "Yes. If we expose this to the board, Catherine will lose everything." For the first time in weeks, hope flickered inside Isla, but Nicholas wasn't finished. "However, evidence alone won't be enough. We need to weaken her first." Isla clenched her fists. "I can convince some of the board members to turn against her." Nicholas leaned back, nodding. "Then that's where we start. You handle the people, I'll handle the legal side. By the time the board meeting arrives, Catherine Montgomery will no longer be queen." Isla studied him for a long moment. This was no longer just a business arrangement. For the first time, she felt like someone was truly on her side. She took a deep breath and reached out her hand. "Let's end this." Nicholas grasped her hand firmly, giving it a light squeeze. Time to take Catherine down. The plan was set. Isla and Nicholas immediately put it into motion. Nicholas brought in the best legal team in New York to analyze the inheritance contract. Just as he suspected, there were signs of forgery in Richard Montgomery's signature. "We need to present this to the board," Nicholas said, his eyes cold with determination. "Once the contract is questioned, Catherine's power will collapse." Isla nodded. "I'll take care of the shareholders." Isla met privately with the board members loyal to her father, revealing Catherine's true motives. "She doesn't care about the company, she's using it for her own benefit," Isla told a group of key shareholders. Doubt began to creep into their minds. Meanwhile, Nicholas dug up evidence of Catherine's shady financial deals, further eroding her credibility. The day of the board meeting arrived. Catherine entered the conference room radiating confidence, but Isla and Nicholas were ready to take her down. Isla rose to her feet, placing a folder on the table. "Today, I'm here to expose the truth about Catherine Montgomery." She flipped through the documents, presenting proof of the forged contract, Catherine's suspicious transactions, and the company's financial decline under her management. The shareholders began whispering among themselves, their faith in Catherine wavering. Nicholas stood, his voice cutting through the tension. "I motion for a vote to remove Catherine Montgomery from her position as head of Montgomery Enterprises." The room fell silent. Catherine's face paled, but she couldn't stop what was coming. Finally, the board voted. Catherine was officially removed from power. Isla turned to Nicholas, and for the first time, she felt victorious. Catherine was furious, but it was over. Montgomery Enterprises was back in Isla's hands. At last, the war was over. Montgomery Enterprises was back in Isla's hands. Catherine was utterly defeated, leaving the building in disgrace. But Isla didn't feel the triumph she had expected. She stood on the penthouse balcony, gazing at the glittering cityscape, yet inside, she felt empty. She had reclaimed her company. She had won. But now what? Footsteps echoed behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Nicholas. He stood there, his eyes no longer distant. "We won," he said softly. Isla let out a quiet laugh, devoid of joy. "And what about our marriage?" Nicholas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a familiar stack of papers. Their marriage contract. Isla held her breath as he pulled out a lighter. In mere seconds, flames engulfed the pages, the fire consuming every clause, every condition. Isla's breath caught in her throat as Nicholas flicked the lighter open. The flame danced dangerously close to the pages. "Wait," she started, but it was too late. The fire caught, devouring the contract in seconds. She watched in stunned silence as the paper curled into blackened ashes, the last remnants of their transaction turning to dust. Her heart pounded. This wasn't Nicholas Blackwell, the ruthless businessman. This was something else, something terrifyingly real. Nicholas met her gaze, his voice low but certain. "I don't want a marriage with conditions anymore. I want you." Isla couldn't tear her eyes away from the ashes of their marriage contract. The clauses, the conditions, the rules they had set, all reduced to nothing. She looked up, meeting Nicholas's gaze. "Are you really willing to throw everything away?" Nicholas stepped closer, slow but deliberate. "This marriage started as a transaction, but it isn't anymore." Isla's heart pounded. She had always believed Nicholas was cold, incapable of emotion, but now there was something in his eyes. Something deeper, something real. She shook her head, still unsure. "You're not someone who believes in love." Nicholas let out a soft chuckle, but this time, it wasn't mocking. "Maybe you're right, but if I have to believe in something, I want to believe in you." For the first time, Isla no longer saw Nicholas Blackwell as an emotionless machine. He didn't need to say much. His actions spoke louder than words. Nicholas reached for her hand, pulling her gently closer. "Give me a chance to start over." Isla held his gaze. This time, no walls, no doubt. She nodded slowly. "All right, but Nicholas, this time, you don't get to run away." Nicholas smiled, then leaned in, pressing a soft but certain kiss against her lips. This was no longer a contract marriage. This was a new beginning.